use the word inevitable, that Zundel's use of this rhetoric would cause harm to Jews. And the tribunal bought that, and they knocked him off, barred him from online, which was their intention in the prosecution from the start. Halfway through this, it went on for days, and I think 80, 90 days off and on. Zundel fled. He came to the United States, and he went into business here safely under the free speech of our First Amendment and so forth. But he violated his visa, was returned to Canada. Canada sent him back to his native Germany, where he was prosecuted for Holocaust denial and jailed, sentenced to a term of 5 years. He served 3 and was released. But one of the striking things about that whole proceeding was how literal he was, repeating. That's what anti-Semites do. I've read about 90 anti-Semitic treatises, some running to 3 volumes in Latin. It's very easy to do because they repeat themselves. They plagiarize themselves, and you're always in familiar ground with a little wrinkle, a little adaptation, some tinsel added according to circumstances, changed circumstances, and so on. Well, I was on the stand for 8 days, and most of that time in the care of the I was in cross-examination by the defense attorney, and he tried all his tricks and traps for me, set them. But I knew the history. I knew that Bogdan Khmelnytsky and the horrible Cossack massacres of the 17th century had occurred. I knew that A to Z. He didn't, and that was over and over the story. So I ran rings around him. And then one day, I can't help but recall this. Apropos of nothing at all, he said, he complained, the proceedings are dragging out too long. There are different places, and there are travel expenses and so forth. And my client is in financial straits. He's in danger of bankruptcy. Well, what do you think I said? In my best Sunday school voice, I said, Mr. Zundel is already bankrupt morally and intellectually. It would not be inappropriate if he were also financially. Now, along the way, I addressed the issue of Muslim anti-Semitism. And there is, of course, a substratum of anti-Semitism in the Quran. But Jews cannot be accused of killing the God of Islam, nor Mohammed, though I think he was accused of trying to poison him. But obviously, Jews were very much better off in medieval Islam, in Islamic societies, than they were in Christian Europe. And the reason I bring this up, what is so striking, I think, is that the principal sources of Muslim anti-Semitism are not Muslim. They're imports from the West, funneled into the Middle East by Christian missionaries and Arab Christians. You find traces of this in the wake of Napoleon's Egyptian expedition of 1798. But much more significantly, from the 1880s on, Christian, European, German, Nazi anti-Semitism, all these were imported in their various guises and grafted onto that substratum of Islamic anti-Semitism. So I think Islam may challenge me on this. This process was Islamically persuasive to the student in the madrasa or the politician haranguing, campaigning for votes and support and so forth. Many of the worst Western texts became available in Arabic translations. That's certainly from the 1880s on. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, perhaps the most notorious of them, was, I think, 1921, and so on. But I have to leave that subject to Minaz. When she takes it up in her class, I will attend. Let me summarize a few points that are particularly significant for me as I look back on the career. One, as I mentioned earlier, the demonization of the Jews. In 1988, Jackie and I went to the International Scholars Conference called Remembering for the Future in England, in London, and I chaired a very lively panel discussion on the challenge to the Christian community, with special emphasis on early Christianity. And I presented my paper called The Taproot of Anti-Semitism, which is exactly what I've always thought it is, the demonization of the Jews. In essence, you have a double dehumanization of the Jews as Satan's allies, armed with his superhuman power, bent on doing his work of destruction and evil, subverting Christianity, etc., etc. And therefore, a standing menace to the church and Christians. The other part of this dehumanization was demoting Jews to animal status, dehumanizing them as pigs, dogs, ad infinitum. And doing that, for anyone, makes it easier to persecute, to kill, to herd them into ghettos, or to herd them into gas chambers. The second thing that I thought was important as I rolled along, I wrote an essay, Anti-Semitism and Law, International, Regional, National, Local, 2016. It's a long essay. It was the hardest thing I've ever done because I was not a lawyer. At any attempt, it deals with attempts to create a system of international law beginning in the 17th century. The essay is optimistic that anti-Semitism will be contained over time. Let me quote the last phrase of it. Will be contained over time amidst the growing recognition of a global Bill of Human Rights, that the nexus of international, regional, national, non-governmental, and local organizations and institutions will grow more and more integrated as they learn to cooperate ever more closely in their work together in enforcing a comprehensive body of international humanitarian law that is set forth in nearly 100 international and regional human rights treaties. I published it in 2016. That was the wrong time to do it, given the resurgence of national phobias and protectionism. That international network was in danger of weakening, being weakened seriously. With the new administration, it's come back to life, and I was encouraged to learn not so long ago, as you too, I dare say, not so much of the former president's indictment as I was to hear of the indictment as a war criminal of Vladimir Putin. Jackie and I returned, so this would be item number 3 in my sacred list. Jackie and I returned to Paris and the Center for the Study of Jews in the English-speaking world, excuse me, for a conference marking the bicentennial of the birth of Benjamin Disraeli, Queen Victoria's favorite prime minister. It was called, that was 2004, he was born in 1804. Man of state and man of letters, homme d'état and homme de lettres. My presentation was Disraeli's ideas of race, religion, and conspiracy, and was published afterwards as Disraeli's boomerang efforts to combat anti-Semitism. In short, Disraeli, oh, thank you. Oh,
It's open. That's all right. I know that one.
it's not whiskey. In short, the article, the essay, develops that Disraeli, despite the fact he devoted much of his life to defending Jews and combating anti-Semitism, but he interpreted history as a matter of race. All is race, a phrase he used over and over again. He made the Jews the superior race, the real rulers of the world, from another phrase of his, from behind the curtain, where they call the shots. Well, generations of anti-Semites, including Hitler, have been able to exploit Benjamin Disraeli's life and writings in support of every kind of imaginable anti-Jewish prejudice and stereotype. One more item, which I think of as a defeat. The Vatican Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews issued a reflection, this is 2015, a reflection on theological questions pertaining to Catholic-Jewish relations on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. I look forward to that with great anticipation. But it warns that Nostra Aetate is, quote, not infrequently overinterpreted. That gave me a jolt. And it postulates, quote, the Church's mandate to evangelize in relation to Judaism. That made me weep. The claim is qualified by the fact, the statement is that there will be no organized institutional mission to evangelize the Jews, that it depends on individuals, private individuals personally, by their example, to set an ideal Christian way of life to attract congregants. That, even so, or nevertheless, I don't, I can't really accept that. The very word conversion has a terrible, dire connotation for Jews. It means annihilation. And I was profoundly saddened when Pope Benedict reinstated the Good Friday prayers for the conversion of the Jews. All of that has been balanced somewhat by Pope Francis, who has said and done a lot of, to my judgment, a lot of good and proper things. Among others, he opened the archives of Pope Pius XII, the wartime Pope, saying, memorably, we are not afraid of history. We are not afraid of the truth. So, what does a lifetime's combating of anti-Semitism and the immersion, the immiseration sometimes, in some 90, as I mentioned, those 90 Adversos Judaeos texts and treatises, I experience it as a kind of species of verbal assault. Some of the words I've used, and these are characterizations that I used to mark particular anti-Semitic texts: ferocious, rabid, pathological, vengeful, implacably deranged verbiage. Though some claim to be scientific and detached, scholarly calm and thoroughness, etc., they invoke. One in particular, Eisenmenger's 3 volumes in Latin, 1701 or 1702, and it has the flavor of the Enlightenment, reason, rational analysis, and so on. But it's fake. As I say, they're easy to read in the sense that they're all plagiarized and repetitious. So, initially, as you might have inferred, I believed that the effort that I was part of, would have the result of ending, extinguishing anti-Semitism on the surface of the earth, universal, complete, and eternal. Obviously, that I soon woke up to that delusion. So I thought it would take a generation, then I put it at 2, and then I put it 100 years. And now I put it at 300 years before Jews and Catholics, Jews and Christians will be able to meet as equals and accept each other fully. Anti-Semitism can be dampened down somewhat for a generation or so, as it was following World War II. But there is always, or it seems, the catch. It's like using anesthesia or a sedative. It wears off, and the malady comes back. Too soon, too often. So instead of abolition, extinction, the effort, it requires an unending effort to contain it. To contain, the word I nowadays use, indispensable. Institutions like HGI will always have work to do. As for me, my life dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism is being well spent. I would do it again, all of it. I like to think of myself in Gershom Scholem's phrase, I am a Jewish non-Jew. Or better yet, what Jacqueline whispered to me, oh, Professor Schweitzer, you have a Jewish heart. I hope I do. Thank you ever so much. I would, yes, questions, observations, rebuttals? Yes.
Since this is Holocaust Day,
Yes.
what about the role of the Holocaust and the Holocaust Center in this whole framework?
In the Holocaust Center?
Yeah.
It's very much central. It is, you can't miss it. It goes, if you look at what Manaz put up recently of the programs and offerings in this period, and that's year-round, not on that scale, but when I began going, from Portland to Portland, the highest item on my agenda was to teach the Holocaust. Yes.
You see the Holocaust as like a culmination of anti-Semitism, or of a different nature?
Yes, I do. I see it. Without the anti-Semitism that springs from interpreted or misinterpreted, whatever, from the New Testament, no Holocaust. Mm-hmm. The hatred of the Jews is unique in world history. It's the oldest hatred. It is the most deep-going, rooted, and it has this passion to it, which other hatreds wear off. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Jim Sheehan. and,
Jim Sheehan, Father Jim, I love you. I tried to email you an invitation, but I couldn't get your email
I
address
heard in the gospel.
on my computer.
I grew up in Riverdale. That's my one claim to academic fame. And I wear a green shirt in honor of the Irish heritage. On Sunday, I was leading Mass in the East Bronx in Spanish and English, and that gospel hit me hard. This is the week after Easter. It's called the Divine Mercy Sunday. I prefer the name Doubting Thomas because my brother's named Thomas. But it says the apostles were locked for fear of the Jews.
Yes.
Now, you kind of fudge it every so often and put in the word leadership or something else, but we know we're not supposed to. Now, what's very horrifying, I think I agree with you, is that biblical source can really be used as a rod to end this discussion of equality once and for all. So that scares me. And I'm sure every religion faces it. The second level I have is a question for you. With all your studies, did you ever talk to psychologists about where does racism, anti-Semitism fit in to that inhuman drive that we all seem to have? It came up again in Black Lives Matter. You know, what are people expecting from us is in us. And people say we can't change. So I guess my question is there change, even when the texts belie it? And what are the eyes do you have on the subject?
I think you can contain it. You can reach the young. The malleable minds that Manaz has in her classes, there you can do some effective good in averting this. But you cannot, I don't think, root it out completely. I would hope so. But as to, I haven't talked with psychologists, but I have often wondered how demented a mentality must be to pervade, to generate this kind of hatred, which, you know, at first glance is utterly irrational and senseless, false. It has no basis in fact or reality, historical or present times. No, I'm afraid not. Jeff, don't let me off go free.
No, there's a.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, go.
I don't know if you saw yesterday's, I think it was yesterday's Times, the Darrell Horn article.
No, I don't, say it again.
In Atlantic, yesterday's Atlantic.
Yeah,
Darrell Horn wrote an article that the Holocaust education is not helping.
yeah.
I don't know if you.
I knew of it, I haven't read it, yes, it's on the list to do, yes. Well, I don't know the scope and depth of his argument, but my instinct is to oppose it, to resist, yes. I believe in study, education, illumination, yes, oh yes. I don't see how humanity can get on without that. Yes.
Yeah, I think at the end of the article, I just read it last night. The end, his point was, if it's not done right,
Okay.
it's dangerous.
Yes.
It's negative, but if
Yes.
it's done right, it can work.
Yes.
And so that's the challenge.
I remember when I was going P2P, I would insist that they had to read Raoul Hilberg's 700 and something page book on the destruction of the European Jews. Yes. Otherwise, you're shallow.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. A lot of the Holocaust museums and Holocaust teaching
Yeah.
don't go into the history of the Jews.
Yes.
They just start with the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what he said is dangerous.
Well, one of the great benefits of medieval history for me was precisely that. I knew this was running up to 1933. Yes, that was, yeah, I wrote a review in which I expressed, of a book, and I expressed that kind of criticism, so you're right on, David. Yes,
You
yes,
say that, you mentioned that education is the
the key,
main thing
yeah,
that
yeah.
would prevent this. What do you do about reaching the unwashed MAGA mentality that doesn't read books, doesn't read newspapers, doesn't
Yeah.
have access,
Yeah,
has deliberately avoided access
sure,
to the things that would change their mind.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, they're growing. And if not MAGA, that mentality is growing.
yes.
How do you counteract that?
I think the only way is the lead that is given. If we have national leaders who take a tolerant approach to all these issues, and learned approach, that example, that's the only kind of thing that's going to sway such. Otherwise, we just have to outlive them and hope we can get to their children. Yeah. Yes, Gordon.
I have to give you a hug afterwards, but I became a Jasper in 1991. I was brought on as a chair of the department, and I guess, I don't know how Fred got my name, but it was pretty obvious just by my last name that you might conclude that I was Jewish. And I am Jewish, or I was born Jewish anyway.
They were rare in Manhattan in that.
And I
those
get
years.
a call from Fred that, to join the Passover service that the Holocaust Center was had. And I was, actually my wife came with me, and that was my first introduction to the Holocaust Center. And I did a little research about Catholic institutions around the country. And this endeavor, the Holocaust Center, was remarkable to me as a presence in a Catholic institution, because I saw there was none at that time. There may be some
Yes.
recognition.
Yes.
But, so that was when our relationship began. Actually, I've probably been to more church services than I've been to synagogue services in my life, but that's another story. But I don't know if what came through in your remarks, but we are now a little luncheon group, Fred, I,
Yes.
another emeritus person here.
Yes.
It turns out that Manhattan College has a significant number of Jews in the Department of Religious Studies.
Yes.
And at one point, I don't know if the chair was Jewish at one point, I don't know. the
Several
history.
times.
Yes.
Several times, okay.
Yes.
Uh,
Our buddy Stephen
I think,
was one of them. Yes.
I think what I'd like to convey, or what I have found, is that Fred is, he represents something which is very important for all of our students, and that is to say, he provides the arc of history, the arc of our evolution, and that nowadays, it's always been important. It is much more important now for us to understand historic history.
Yes.
And Fred is an enormously humane person. Sometimes if he will tell you about his areas of expertise, but he is beyond that. He is a humane person. And I only wish that there were more people like him, not necessarily in coming from the position of history, but just as a humane individual. And that's why this kind of individual is so important for the students here at Manhattan College, so that they get this idea of how important history is in how we evolve. Because you'll make the same mistakes again if you don't listen to history.
Yeah.
So that's my comment.
Yes. Thank you, Gordon.
Hi, I'll call you Fred because Ben is my son. You asked him to call you Fred. So I am a child, 70-year-old child of the Holocaust survivors. And I grew up in the former Soviet Union. And we used to have a game, funny game. Who was worse, Hitler or Stalin?
Yes.
Or Himmler or Beria? And many times Stalin won. So in this country, you know, I'm here now 40 years, and there is a rise of anti-Semitism on the left. And as growing up in Russia, Soviet Union, to me, it's more threatening sometimes than even to my parents who are Holocaust survivors. So can you address the threat from the extreme left of anti-Semitism?
Yes, I think there is no choice between Hitler and Stalin. Stalin was at it for more years.
Right.
But no, they're both, they're both, you know, Father Jim raised the question about psychology. I haven't ventured into it, but I thought that anti-Semites, theorists as well as practitioners, murderers, must be demented. They must have some mental limitation, shortcoming, some, you know, fragmented, or you know, the willingness to obey orders. There are so many dimensions to this question. I just conclude that anti-Semites, both theorists and practitioners, are mentally deranged. Yes, must be. Otherwise, they couldn't think this way or do this sort of thing.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, Fred,
yes.
I just want to, so I think his question is also about how anti-Semitism is not only a problem with the right, but it's also a problem in the left.
Yes.
So, you know, I think that's a really good question about why that's going on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you want to address that?
I'm unequipped at the moment. But it is. It's.
I think it's almost the same, for different reasons.
I fear it more because they are a little bit masked, and they are, you know, pretending that they are humane. But, you know, I can recognize, you know, skinheads and all that stuff. You know, they are open. And, you know, it's much easier to see an enemy up front than somebody who's trying to sort of camouflage and disguise themselves. So, you know, the reason for I'm asking you this question because my parents lived through both,
Yes.
you know, Holocaust and communism.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, it was tough to ask them. You know, because, you know, in '53, just before Stalin died,
Yeah.
Beria was ready to do another Holocaust.
Oh, yes. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's tough, you know, so, you know, these MAGA people and all that stuff, those MAGA extreme, you know,
Yeah.
it's easy to recognize them because they're out there. But, you know, when I see somebody in Congress to extreme left, it's, you know, I get extremely worried
Yeah.
because it reminds me of former Soviet Union.
Sure. But, you know, one could argue that communism and Nazism are ideological twins.
Exactly.
They're both fascist
Yeah, fascist.
outgrowths. Yes. Yes.
It's amazing to me to think about how long you've been doing this and how intellectually engaged you are at this phase of your life. It's amazing to me.
Yay!
But the element that I thought you might want to share with this audience is the ways in which the institution kind of worked with you, but in particular through an individual. I thought you might want to remember Brother Peter at this time.
Yes, yes. Brother Peter Drake was an electrical engineer. They're the brilliant ones, as Gordon knows. We were very different personality types, but we got on marvelous like twins. He always, the message I always had to get was make it short. But Peter was one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. Walking with him, any subject that came up, he was at home. He was an authority on it. In the humanities, in literature, in history, in science, nature, and he had a prodigious memory for quotations that he provided me, which I used as starting points. But we drew up the letter. In those days, we sent out letters to invite for our speakers, and Peter and I did that together, and posters, and we walked all over the campus, and we walked all over Riverdale posting them, he had, he was quicker than I. I remember analyzing afterwards some of our speakers where they might have done different or where they fell short, and so and Peter was the most acute in that analysis. And also, I tend to be doing next time what I did last time. Not Peter. He was venturesome and suggesting new departures. It was Peter. We got in trouble together. The Nostra Aetate has another paragraph about Islam and the Muslims, and it suggests, or the imperative is, that some process of mutual engagement, reconciliation and understanding be initiated with Muslims. And so Peter and I thought, well, yes, now is the time. Or, yes, let's do that, because it has the sanction of the Pope, of the Church, of Vatican II, and of our administration. So we went ahead. We were arranging speakers and workshops and that sort of thing. And then we got shouted down. It was too, as I said afterwards to Peter, it was too much too soon. The community was engaged. I think the difficulties in the Middle East were particularly harsh and dangerous, forbidding. And though there was a divide that in